If you want a truly spoiler-free review of The Last of Us Part 2, then this video is for you. I will not talk about any plot or specific events, even if they are small and seemingly inconsequential. I believe that these experiences are best with open minds and less expectations. I will focus on gameplay, directing, characters, pacing, and how the game makes me feel without talking about anything specific. My name is John, and I'm with Life Never Lost. And if you just want a TLDR, did I like this game? Did I dislike this game? Did I love it? Did I hate it? I'll just tell you up front, and then you can choose to listen on if you'd like. And the truth is, I really love this game. Even if it was difficult to love, if that makes sense. At times. At times it challenges you in a way that I enjoyed, to put it that way. So before I get into depth with what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start with some prerequisites. So this game is a sequel. I don't think you can really play this game and experience it in a good way without playing the first part 1, The Last of Us, that came out in 2013 and then was re-released a little bit later on for the PS4. I just don't think, and I think that's part of the reason why they named it Part 2. It's not really a sequel. It's like, reimagined. It's not like an Avengers movie type thing where you can really kind of enjoy it for the most part and get out of it in as a containerized experience, even if you hadn't experienced all the other movies. Like, there's a lot of Marvel movies I didn't see, but I was able to watch the Avengers movies and still enjoy it. I'm sure there's some benefits to it, but you didn't need those. You didn't need to see Doctor Strange in order to enjoy the last Avengers movies, even if that was a good movie. I didn't see it, but in any case, with this game, I really do think, in order to experience it the way they want you to experience it, to appreciate the story, you need to be able to have that context of the first game. So I'd highly recommend playing the first one. Other than that, I don't think that there's really any other knowledge that you need for this. If you're one of the few people who have been able to avoid any spoilers with this game, any of the leaks that have been done, any of the controversy or complaints that people have had, or passion that people have had, both for and against this game, then I think that's great, and I think you should keep it that way and just play this game. And if you don't know otherwise, it is a third-person shooter, but there are some other aspects to it in terms of stealth and a lot of other cool stuff that's definitely worth checking out. And this first section here, I'm going to focus on video game stuff, stuff that you can just enjoy from like playing a video game perspective. And then later on, after that, I'm going to talk about, I guess it would be more like movie stuff that talks about the story. But again, I'm not going to talk about anything specific in terms of what happens. I'm just going to focus on some of those aspects that I talked about before that I think is enough for you to have an idea if this is a game that you want to play without any spoilers, which is something that I always look for but always have a difficulty finding, which is why I'm making this review. So let's jump into it, and I'll try my best to keep on pace here so that I'm not spending too much time on things that don't matter too much or that don't need to be overstated. So, for example, the graphics. The graphics in this game are awesome, and I think that's pretty universal. I've watched a lot of other playthroughs and reviews and evaluations of this game just to kind of get perspective of what people are saying out there. I'm fortunate I was able to be completely spoiler free in terms of me experiencing this game. I did not have any idea what I was walking into other than what I had played in the first game. And but in any case, the graphics are great in this game. I felt the first game was really good, and for a while it felt like it was one of the best, if not the best, graphics on the PS4, even though that game was originally made for the PS3, and they remastered it for the PS4, and this game just takes it up even more. It was you get it's subtle at first, and I think that there's going to be a lot of that even with next gen gaming, where you don't always realize what you're looking at in terms of how good the graphics are, and the more you get used to it, and after you've had enough time and exposure to it that you get used to it and go back, you can look at it and compare. So after playing this game through twice, a little over twice, I started it a third time and then did some extra modes and stuff. But after doing that enough, and then watching some YouTube of the first game, you can see, even though those graphics were still great for the time when they came out, they really have stepped it up in terms of the animations. I think obviously we're at a point where it's past just how high is the resolution, does it have HDR. Games can check those boxes and still not look great, or still not look as good as other games that may have lower technical capabilities but just aren't as good. But in any case, graphics are great, animations look great. I don't think very few people, I think, would complain about that. In terms of the gameplay, I'd say one word probably describes it, and I'll probably use this word a lot for other parts of the review, and that is balanced. In terms of the speed, the stealth, the melee combat, the gun combat, I really enjoyed it. I don't play a ton of video games. I really try to only play things that I feel are worth my time and that I can enjoy, and that it's higher quality that I can get out of it. And I enjoyed the speed of it. The stealth is still kind of like what you kind of experience, I think, of like even like some of the older Batman games. There's still kind of like a somewhat goofy element to it in terms of it not always being super realistic in terms of the enemies seeing you or not seeing you, and there are things that you just kind of have to accept. Like you could be hiding behind a desk and you can see that let's say you have a gun on your backpack and it's sticking out of the back a little bit, and it's sticking out of the back, but the guy walking by technically can't see it. So there are little things like that are not super realistic, but at the same time, I can't say it hurt it too much for me, because I kind of like having structure in terms of understanding what works and what doesn't work in terms of stealth in the game, and using that to be able to get through it, because this game does put you through a lot of stressful situations in terms of where you have to compete. So I appreciated that, even though it wasn't super realistic. I think there could be some improvements and balance to that in the future, but still a great experience. I'm also not, even though I do not play a lot of shooting video games or games that have shooting in general, I really enjoyed the gunplay in this game for multiple reasons. I liked the types of weapons. I liked the balance that they brought to it. I liked how ammo is used and the upgrades that you can do to them, the pacing at which they're available. It's relatively simple, so I like that. I don't want tons of guns with like so many variations of things. I know that other games, really focus them on that and pride themselves on it. Me, I like it a little bit more straightforward, and I felt the game delivered on that for me. And in terms of the melee combat, I really enjoyed how they implemented it. It took a little bit to get used to in terms of how you dodge and how you strike enemies and how they look at it and what patterns you can do. I'll also add that this game is very customizable and very accessible. And so if there's something that, let's say you start playing this game and there's something that you feel feels off to you. Maybe you don't like the amount of ammo you're getting. Maybe you find the stealth too difficult or too easy. Maybe you find the gunplay too difficult or too easy. You can really customize a lot of it. It's not just a, easy, hard, medium type difficulties. You can customize each of those. So let's say you want the enemy AI to be really intense, but you want a lot of ammo. You can customize it and choose that. With that said, if you're a decently experienced gamer, I'd recommend just going through it and playing it on normal or hard. I played it the first time on normal and really enjoyed it. I felt it was a pretty good balance between everything. But again, if there's anything in there that you have difficulty with, if you get lost, there's a way to basically always have hints or kind of like a guide that shows you where to go if you get lost or you're not sure what to do. I talked about the ammo. I talked about the enemy AI. You can choose some stealth options in there. You can even do slow motion to trigger manually or when you're aiming. If you want to make the gunplay easier, you can turn on auto aim to help with that. You can help with some camera options if you have trouble using dual sticks. So if you're watching this video or listening, you're probably not in that category, but it's so cool to see all those options in there. It's not something that I've really investigated with previous games before, but I'd seen a video that talked about how accessible they did it to where even people who are blind have some abilities to play the game, where you have audio cues that tell you what buttons to press and how you investigate areas and picking up ammo and weapons and enemy types. And so there's a lot of cool stuff in there. Whether you need it or not, even if you just want to do it for fun, or if you're good at certain things and not good at other things, they really do a lot so that you can customize it to the way that you want it, so that you can do what's probably most important to the creators, which is the story. But before we get into the story, I'll just talk about a few other things that are more gameplay related. The level design I thought was pretty good. It has platforming and some puzzles that are pretty realistic. It's not like so over the top that you go through some super ridiculous scenarios that don't make sense. And granted, they have the context of the story to rely upon the ability to kind of justify why environments are in certain states. And even with that, they do it in a pretty well-grounded way. So it's not like so outrageous and out of the top that it's clearly done just to make a video game. Whether that's important to you or not, just thought it was worth mentioning. And there was a few times where I thought some of the levels were a little bit confusing to me, where I'd get lost in terms of not sure where to go or what to do. And I think it was mostly my fault. Whatever my lack of ability in terms of direction or navigation in real life might translate to the video game. So I would feel, again, the average gamer would probably not have as many difficulties as me. I think I have a harder time with that stuff, and so I definitely relied upon using hints when they would pop up. If you get stuck for a while, the game will pop up and give you a hint, and you can choose to view it or not, and it'll kind of help guide you. And there's a few times where I did get frustrated because I got lost, but ultimately that happened a handful of times, and overall I'd still say that the level design, the platforming, and the puzzles was a good experience. In terms of errors or glitches, there were a few times where players would go through solid objects, or people would kind of get in your way when you're trying to do something. Again, it didn't happen frequently enough to where I felt it really brought down the experience, but it did happen. It did happen a handful of times to where I felt it was worth mentioning. So it's not perfect, but again, still an overall very high quality game. I'd say I could say the same thing for the controls. I think the controls are done very well. Just the way the buttons are mapped, the logic, the consistency behind it, even when you go across various mechanisms, because obviously my biggest frustration with games and controls is when the same button is used for multiple things, which is going to happen. But when you're in scenarios where you potentially want to do different things at the same time, if that makes sense. So I'll use like Madden. I know it's a sports game as an example. The hike button, which is X on a PlayStation, is also a button that you can press to throw to one of your receivers, the X receiver. And that can be really frustrating if you're trying to quickly hike the ball and then the game is slow to respond, and then you press the same button, you accidentally throw it to someone you didn't mean to. This game does have that a few times where, again, the same button is used for different actions, and I don't always love that. And it's not horrible, but it does happen a few times, and I probably shouldn't focus too much on the negatives because overall I thought the controls are very well thought out. They feel right. They do take a little bit of getting used to because I don't know how standard it is in games, again, because I don't play a ton of them. So maybe it has become more standard in terms of the control scheme, but overall I really enjoyed it. I thought it worked well for balancing out stuff. Like I said, it does take some time to get used to, but once you do get used to it, you can be much more efficient in terms of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to access, when you're trying to access it under stressful situations, and your experience can definitely help play into that to where they have a good platform for you to build on. So overall, very, very happy with the controls. Length of the game, I thought it was perfect for me. I know some people are just focused on maximizing having the most number of hours possible. But for me, it blended very well in the story. Going through it, over 2 times, there are, you do think there are certain aspects I'm like, oh man, it would have been cool if I could have done this with this character. And I think that's true. However, I do believe that everything that was done in this game was, even with the gameplay, was focused around the story and was very intentional. So while, yes, it could have been cool to do certain scenarios with certain characters and kind of have that experience, it would have taken away from the story in some perspective. And I can respect that they made the decisions that they did. So, it's, again, the length of the game, instead of focusing purely on the number of hours, I think how it paired with the story was satisfying to me. So I appreciate them because I do believe that it was very intentional. I'd mentioned that I played this game a couple times, so I do think it has some replayability. With that said, a word that I've used a few times in this already is that it is very stressful. So I can see a lot of people having a hard time wanting to put themselves through that stress again. So from that perspective, they may not want to. And because the game is so balanced from a perspective of action versus non-action versus story versus, having these different kinds of moments that are very, very different from just a run and gun type of video game where you just run and shoot the whole time. But ultimately, that is the core of the game. So after you beat the game, it does give you an option to replay certain scenarios. So if you don't want to deal with cutscenes or those basically non-gunplay elements, you can pick and choose. You don't have to rely upon manual saves to go there and do that. So that was something that was pretty cool, and I appreciated it. And you can choose the difficulty with that. The one downside is that, let me start with the positive piece of that, and then I'll go into the downside as kind of a side product of it, or byproduct of it. And that is, this does have a new game mode. And for those of you that don't know that, that means after you beat the game, instead of starting completely from scratch, any upgrades that you've done through the first playthrough, you can keep and build upon again when you play through the second time. It's a small thing. I'd played that with the Spider-Man game for the PS4 and really enjoyed that. And it's also cool here in terms of, again, the weapon upgrades were simple and straightforward, but materials can be scarce, and so if you're playing under normal conditions, it'd be very difficult to be able to upgrade all of your weapons through the first playthrough. And being able to do that, that was motivation. And because I had gained the skills and I had gained the weapons, I was like, man, I kind of want to like use these to be able to go through and play it. With that said, I had mentioned the encounters that you can select. And when you do those encounters, you don't have all the upgrades or ammo or supplies that you had in the game. They are very like separate containerized options that I assume were done very intentionally in terms of what resources you had when playing those encounters. While I can appreciate that, not having my upgrades and resources was a little bit of a bummer. It'd be nice to be able to choose that as an option in the future. Maybe they can even do that as a patch. I assume it'd be pretty simple to be able to implement that. But like I said, from a gameplay perspective, I enjoyed it. It was enough to make me want to play it over 2 times and do some encounters on top of that. But I understand. We'll talk a little bit more about the story. Again, no spoilers, nothing specific in terms of plot or what happens. But it is a stressful game, so I could see people not ever wanting to play this a second time, and I can respect that. But for me, I enjoyed it so much that I did, and so I believe it does have that replay value. In terms of, I talked a little bit about some of the extra, containerized options that you can do, but on top of that, in terms of side quests, missions, extras, and any other modes, it's pretty limited, but kind of within the story, there's a lot of interesting, simple. I'll say they're simple but interesting and cool things that I was not expecting out of this game in terms of things that I've got to do in this as a video game that I have not experienced in other video games. I really wish I could kind of like give examples, but I really do want to stick to this truly spoiler-free review. But just think about things in life that you may have experienced that are simple but enjoyable, but maybe have never played in a video game. And in terms of just like life, real life, cool things that you get to do in this game. And I don't feel it's forced or overdone. Again, I think this game is very well balanced, and being able to experience that in the game was pretty cool. I really did enjoy it. So from that perspective, as like a side quest thing, I thought it was good. There's a lot of stuff you can choose to explore or not explore, depending on, how you're feeling and what you want to do. It's really your option. So I was happy with it from that perspective. So that is the conclusion to what I'm going to talk about in terms of the game stuff. I'm going to go into what I kind of call the movie stuff, or non-game things that are more about the storyline. Again, no spoilers in here. We'll talk about anything specific, but talk about things at a very high level, very general, and let's get into that. So let's start with the storyline. I think whether it's a movie or a game, something that's always stuck out to me, I believe that Martin Scorsese said something along these lines. I don't remember how many years ago I heard it. I think it was an interview, but I'm not 100% sure. So if anyone knows and wants to correct me on it, I tried searching for it, Martin Scorsese quotes before this, and I didn't find it. So I'm not sure how famous it is. But he basically said there's 2 types of stories. There's one where you know what's going to happen, but you don't know how it's going to happen. And then there's stories where you don't know what's going to happen. And I think this game definitely falls into the latter. I was on the edge of my seat pretty early on in this game because this game is pretty fearless. for better or worse. And I think that's, if you've heard some controversy, I think that's why. I really did not know what was going to happen and how it was going to happen and when it was going to happen. And I really enjoyed that. And I think that, but that does, and that doesn't mean that that's the way that you should make movies. I think you can very much enjoy stories that you know what's going to happen, but you just don't know how it's going to happen. And sometimes that can be more interesting, in fact. And the reason for that is, once you know what happens, it can definitely change your perspective on how much you want to experience it again. So I talked about, playing this game multiple times, and when I played it again, definitely not all of it, but the huge majority of the tension was gone. And that's because I remembered pretty much everything that happened that was significant from a story perspective. There's definitely details and things that you pick up on and can appreciate, and new areas that I found that I enjoyed that I didn't get through the first playthrough. But from a story perspective, there are shocking things that happen and that can really catch you off guard. And it was fun. It made it kind of like a roller coaster ride from that perspective. But when you know it's going to happen, it's definitely much less impactful. So it's a double-edged sword, but I like to start off describing stories in one of those categories to kind of help gauge, again, whether it's something that you would enjoy or not. Next, let's talk about the scale of this movie. And let me think if I can talk about the scale without giving it away, because in the first game, it had a pretty big scale. And when I say that, I mean it from a story perspective. I'm not necessarily talking about the number of environments or the diversity of the environments or the types of guns or enemies or all that. Instead, I'm talking about it from a perspective of what's at stake with the story. And, is it something small where it only affects a small number of people, or is it something that has a huge impact to a large amount of people? And given the way that the last game ended and what the main purpose of that is, I don't feel it's appropriate to talk about the scale in this game from a story perspective. Because of who Ellie is and what she can represent to humanity, I think talking about that could be a very minor spoiler. So I'm going to skip that piece that I would normally go over. Next, I'm going to talk about how much everything was meaningful versus what felt like filler. There's definitely a lot of repetition in this game, which normally would lead to me thinking it was filler, or at least to a certain extent. However, in this game, in the context of the story and what's going through, I do not view it as filler. And that's because I think it's intended to make you feel exhausted to a certain extent, where you have a lot that is going on that really wears on you. And so I did not view it as filler. I thought, for the most part, it was pretty meaningful. It's not like, certain movies I've seen, like, I'll use my favorite movie as an example, which is The Departed by Martin Scorsese. And, I've watched that movie multiple times, and every line in that movie is like, has a purpose, has a meaning, and is so well done and expresses something about the characters. And while this game is good, I can't say it's quite to that level. Of course, granted, that's like the highest bar I could possibly set. I think a lot of the side dialogue, you're going to get out of it what you want it to. There's there's notes and kind of like sub stories or hidden stories that evolve, that are there for people that you may never see in this game. But it does require some effort in terms of whether you're going to read about them and their stories, and if you care about them, you know. Again, it requires effort, so I think a lot of people will skip over it. And that's not necessarily right or wrong. I think you should do what feels right to you in terms of what level of effort you want to do. But I will say this, if you do take the time to make that effort to understand people's stories, where they're coming from, what they're saying, why they're saying it, the context of it, how that affects the environment that you're in, and the actions that take place, I think it can definitely enrich the game. So, but at the same time, I think some people will just be like, whatever, I don't care, I'm not going to read it, I'm not going to do it. I've watched lots of playthroughs of people playing this game, and, I saw a lot of people doing that. And, and I didn't always feel like doing it too, so it's a balance. It's as much as you want to do and as little as you want to do from that perspective, to a certain extent. Of course, the game forces you to do a certain amount of things that you can't bypass, but there's a lot of side stuff and things that you can do. Ultimately, I thought it was well constructed. If anything, I don't know. I think it's a good balance of not being too long, not having too much filler, but still giving you enough extra context. There's a YouTube channel. I wish I could remember the name. I want to say it's like VGS. I don't think he liked the game too much, but ironically, I think he still makes. And I could be wrong, so forgive me if I'm missing that. But maybe he had mixed opinions on it. But nonetheless, does multiple videos that talks about the stories within the story of The Last of Us Part 2, of all the human elements and people that go through things. And so there's a lot of cool stuff in there. And so if you don't want to, if you have a hard time comprehending it in the game, and I'll be honest, some of the things that I did, I can read something and kind of filter it out, what the meaning behind it is, but he kind of goes into the details of it. And so that's a cool thing that you can do afterwards, and maybe even during the game. I don't think it would be too much spoilers unless that's something that you look forward to discovering on your own. There's between, the actors or the cast or the characters as a whole in this story, I really liked for the most part. There's a few characters that I didn't have a strong opinion either way on. There's no one that I hated or that I found annoying. I think just at times, and it's just the role, you got to have enough pieces to move a story. So you can't expect every character to bring this amazing experience that blows your mind. And I thought it was good for the most part. I think there's a few moments and dialogue and animations that didn't feel top notch to me. But overall, I thought for the characters that mattered and the moments that mattered, it had such amazing acting, both voice acting, and I know that they had to do a certain amount of physical acting too to be able to animate it in the game. Especially some of the heavier moments were just so well done. Overall, I thought this game was directed very well, both from a cutscene perspective, as well as how that ties into the level design, as well as how that ties into what players or what characters you play as, when you play as them, what events you're doing with them, and the context in which you do that as, where there's intentional things where you don't always know what's going on or why it's going on or what details are there. And so again, replaying the game, I was able to have more of that and appreciate some of the subtleties that I totally missed the first time. And that's not something I can say I've really experienced in a video game before. Not to that level, and definitely not from an acting or directing level. And this is something that, I probably a lot of people who have played video games feel this way, but I'll say it because I do feel strongly about it, in that this was one of the few games that I really felt took storytelling to a new level in terms of what you're able to experience, that you can only experience at least this way from a video game. It would not be the same just watching it. Some of the stressful situations, some of the repetitive situations, some of the decisions that you have to make, really putting in that time and that effort changes your perspective when you're playing a video game versus if you were just watching it. And that was something I really appreciated at this game. And it kind of it changes the way you think in terms of who you're playing as and what that really means in the context of a video game. I know I made certain assumptions when playing as certain characters in certain situations, and they use that to tell a story. And I really enjoyed that. Again, from a cinematography standpoint, I think it looked great. The graphics looked great. The animations were great. The characters, really enjoyed. And, everyone has bias. I will say probably what's the strongest bias for me is that I was such a big fan of the first one. I'd played that 2 or 3 times as well. So, kind of going into that, the dialogue I thought was pretty good. It was pretty straightforward. I didn't find it distracting. There's a few parts that may have caught me off guard or didn't quite sit with me right. And there are some parts that were, it was slower. I won't say boring, but there are times where, you're doing very normal things like walking around. There's a decent amount of, walking and talking, and it's not always the most dynamic stuff, but even though that's the case, I think it kind of helped me with immersion in terms of understanding what these people's lives could be like in terms of literally walking in their shoes and dealing with things are. And so those slower moments, I think, really helped contribute to how intense the intense moments felt when you did them. If everything's intense all the time, then you get used to it and it's not intense. So the pacing of that paired with the dialogue worked well. And I thought even the smaller parts, even if they weren't the most exciting, everything felt, for the most part, very purposeful. I believe that the character development in this game, it was interesting. I definitely questioned things at certain times. And ultimately, the more I thought about it, the more I could see certain things happening. I think that there's a balance of, I don't know, even in life, there are things that you want to happen and you want them to happen a certain way with certain people. And life is just not like that. And of course, this is a video game. It's not life. I'm not deluding myself here in any respect from that perspective. But I try to go in with an open mind, and not just an open mind in terms of what to expect, but I really believe your attitude and how you approach a game can really affect your outlook on it. So I'll use an example of like scary movies, horror movies. I was shown horror movies at a pretty young age, and I had horrible nightmares and had a difficult time with it at a young age, but I'd gotten exposed to it enough that, I got to a point where I felt like nothing could really scare me, at least in movies. Other things in life, definitely scary for the wrong reasons. But at least in movies, with horror movies, I got to a point where I'd gotten used to being so proactive in terms of trying to not get myself get scared that I would do everything I possibly could. I would have this mental dialogue going on inside my head telling me, oh, this isn't fake, this is fake, this isn't real, it's just a movie, that's not realistic, so on and so forth, to try to prevent myself from feeling scared. And it worked. It wasn't 100%, but a lot of times if I didn't want to be scared, I would be scared. And I had done that so much to where I couldn't even really enjoy horror movies anymore. I would laugh at them more than I'd be scared of them. And I was like, wow, why am I even watching horror movies then if I'm trying my best to not be scared by them? And so then I tried to change my attitude in terms of going in. If I wanted to be scared or wanted to have that experience, I really tried to put myself in the people's shoes. And if something happened that was confusing to me, I didn't just say, "Oh man, they wrote this movie stupid," or "They wrote this game stupid. This doesn't make any sense." I tried to approach it from, "No, this is reality. This is what happened. Now let's try to put the pieces together as to why it happened and what to do going forward." So I think that if you take that approach to this game, I think it'll help you with the character development. What you want to happen doesn't always happen, just like life. And how it happens doesn't always happen the way you want it to happen. But I think if you have an open mind and you try to have an attitude and not think of it as this is a written script, but this is these characters' lives and this is what's happening, whether you understand it or not, is going to be set you up for enjoying this game as much as possible. The sound in this game is great. It has everything from the weapons to the distance and where you hear people from, the horror elements in terms of when danger is approaching, from different types of enemies, even the sounds that are made when you're upgrading your weapons. It's very thoughtful, very intentional in terms of what you're doing. They're very consistent and have distinct sounds for picking up certain items and what makes sense, and audio cues and high quality, and I really enjoyed it. I think the soundtrack, my number one rule for a soundtrack is, does it ever distract me? Sometimes movies or games will have music that just takes me out of the moment for whatever reason, and I can't say this game ever did that. So that's number one best thing. The next question though is it memorable? There is one song in particular that's definitely memorable, and the rest of it kind of fades away. And I think that's probably intentional. I was a big fan of the first game's theme, and I thought that was more from like a cinematic perspective, just like a movie style production. Probably I enjoyed a little bit more just going off of my gut. I haven't sat down and compared them side by side just in terms of what that is. But I will say that the one song in particular in this game is was really used from like a story perspective in terms of driving and doing a little bit of foreshadowing of what happens. So I'll leave it at that from the sound perspective. Overall, I thought the game was, again, if you went in with that open mind, I think it was coherent. I thought it was logical. I thought it was consistent. There's a few things that I think some people definitely have been critical in terms of thinking those out of character moments. But again, I think if you think about it in the context of the story, instead of thinking you're right and it's bad writing, I think if you think about it as this is what really happened and trying to draw logical conclusions as to why it happened, it's justifiable even if you don't like it. But overall, this movie had a lot of themes. It had moments where it was scary. It had moments that was action packed. It had stuff that was shocking. It had a little bit of romance. I mean, it was definitely a core thing, but you overall got this looming, gloom and intention behind it. So while that is definitely strong aspects and important parts of the story, no one's going to confuse it for like a romance movie or a game or romantic comedy or anything like that. But there was some funny stuff. There was some heartwarming stuff in like different ways than I guess you would kind of stereotype. It was very suspenseful. I told you I was just on the edge of my seat. At the same time, sometimes it was so intense, man. I had to take breaks. As much as obviously I'm making this over a month after the game had come out, and I'd gotten it the day it had come out, and played it pretty consistently. But I didn't want to rush to making a review. I wanted to sit and think on it and get other people's perspectives and see how much it changed mine, and not just rush to judgment to make something quick. So hopefully that is appreciated, but nonetheless, it's what felt right to me. There's a lot of drama. I told you it's a lot of stressful, a lot of significant stuff. There's a few cute parts. And again, I talked about some other parts in terms of pacing where it could be slower and you're walking around. At the same time, because of those other parts being so intense, sometimes it's nice for it to be kind of peaceful and relaxing. I wouldn't say it's super extreme, but it is, this is pretty explicit in terms of a violent game. There's a few other explicit things to a certain extent. I think it's still pretty mild in the modern day and age, but maybe stuff that you don't expect from a video game. So this is definitely an adult video game, and not just in terms of it being explicit, but in terms of the themes of, I think of 13-year-olds or something trying to digest it, and I think you got to be pretty mature to be able to appreciate it. At the end of the day, anyone can play a game where you go and shoot stuff and enjoy it to a certain extent, but I think you really can appreciate it more being able to think about the implications in real life in terms of what's important to you. And this movie did that to me. It wasn't very weird or offbeat, but it did make me think a lot about life. And I don't want to sound, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but I'm not trying to exaggerate how much this game changed my life, but it's been over a month, and there is probably thousands of hours of The Last of Us 2 content online, and here I am adding to it, just because this game had an impact on me. It's one of the best games I've ever played. I'm still thinking about it in terms of what happened in the game and what it means for humanity. What lessons could be learned, what lessons are obviously not learned by certain people that you see in life, and I don't know, it just makes you think about what's meaningful in life and what you want to do with it, and what opportunities you have, what you would trade for certain things in your life, because maybe you have those things already. Maybe you haven't gone through struggle that other people have, and that they'd wish they could have what you have right now. And you should use that to appreciate your life and have that perspective. And, these weren't things that were just kind of like here and there throughout in the game. I felt it was very throughout the game. And so, it meant a lot to me. In terms of the resolution of the game, it was satisfying to me. I felt it was a good length. I felt, again, it kept me on the edge of my seat. It set me up for certain things and then delivered in other ways. Again, it's not like the happiest, positive, fun game, but it was definitely an experience for me. It's pretty cut and dry, so it's not the kind of game like BioShock Infinite where you could potentially have all these theories, and there's definitely some stuff in there and details that people are finding and posting on Reddit and stuff that you can appreciate and learn more, and there's little things like that, but not the kind of stuff that's so crazy and off the wall and philosophical that just kind of flips the game on its head. At least that I'm aware of. at least the way that they present it and what I took out of it. So, I just talked a lot and hopefully did not say anything that you felt was a bad spoiler. And that's why I intentionally wanted to call these truly spoiler free, because in terms of the spirit of not wanting to do spoilers, I wanted to do that. Now, of course, if you talk about anything about the game, you could say, "Oh, you said that there's weapons in the game. That's a spoiler." Some games don't have weapons, so it's not. I included information about things that I thought was enough for you to be able to know what kind of game you're getting into, know what to expect without knowing any of the details in terms of the story or the events that happened. Of course, those other discussions or other details that I had talked about, but I think this is a good example of how much you can talk about without giving away stuff, because I can't stand it. Even when someone gives away the basic premise or plot of something, it makes it so I can't even watch someone's review, even if they say it's spoiler free. So this is that, hopefully truly spoiler free review. So please leave any thoughts or comments on here. If you do want me to, I don't know, maybe have a panel of people or talk with a friend in terms of doing spoilers around The Last of Us Part 2 and talking about specific events and things, there's a lot, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I felt I wanted to make this without any of those details. But if that's, if this video does well and people do want to hear that, then that's something I'm open to doing. So we'll see how things go. Otherwise, please leave me your feedback, and thank you for listening. This is John with Life Never Lost.